After e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5, we play f5. And in this video, we're going to go through the last things we haven't gone through so we can finally close the Spanish saga forever. So let's start with this one. Knight c3. Now, we know we have to take this pawn. And now, there's two ways. Either white takes in e4 with the knight or takes the knight in c6. We've also seen knight takes e5, but we've seen a lot of it. And make sure you watch all the other videos of this saga to know how to beat the Spanish opening. Let's start with this one. After knight e4, knight f6 is the move, d3, and now d5. Now the novelty is this one, knight to g3. When the knight goes back to g3, how to punish this move. Okay, well, carry on with development. Bishop d6 to protect the pawn that was hanging. Castle, castle, and after rook to e1, this is the move, knight d4. And it's a bit surprising, because there's double attack on the pawn in e5, but obviously, if white does go for the pawn in e5, then he's dropping the bishop in b5. So that means that the bishop will have to do something about it. So knight e5 is not possible. Two options here make sense. Bishop moving away, let's say bishop a4. Okay, now knight to g4. And it's already big trouble for white. This knight can't really move away because we have an attack on f2 with the knight attacking the queen. It's going to be a disaster. Besides, we're protecting the pawn in e5 multiple times. Bishop e3. Putting more defense over f2, putting more attack over the knight in d4. Now take. Check. Queen can't take back because of the rook, so pawn takes is the only move. And now knight sacrifice in h2. What to do now? We're also threatening knight f3 check. The position is terrible for white. If king takes, then queen check. And it doesn't look like we can win that knight, but actually we can. After king to g1, c6 now. Reinforcing the center. Completely careless. The position is completely won already. This bishop is just locked. Queen to e2 now. These are all best moves by white in order to see what's going on. So white is not playing bad moves, but rather just trying to resist in a faulty variation. Rook to f6. The idea of lifting up with the queen. Queen to f1. So now you understand why queen e2, in order to bring more defense over the king side, because we're threatening rook to h6. So in this case, we're going to play rook to g6. After queen f1, rook to g6. And we also have the bishop pair ready to attack the king side. Rook to e2, but now bishop to h3. That was going to happen anyway. Queen to e1, only move left to do. And now rook to f8 completes the masterpiece. The idea, which is, by the way, unstoppable, is to play rook to f3, and then this rook will sacrifice for this pawn, and when they take back, you take back. The position, now it's like mate in 7 or something like that, but even a few moves ago, when we were already, after the sacrifice of the knight, the position was already evaluated like -6. So back in this position, you remember that we went through bishop back to a4. We mentioned why the knight cannot take the pawn in e5. So what if the knight just takes our knight? Says, you know what, I don't like your face. Get out of my sight. Well, obviously you take back, and now there's many options that we can go through just to illustrate what the points will be, but none of them are actually any good. You see, what you need to understand about this position is that this bishop here will never play again, right? There's no way to get anywhere from this side, even if he goes to a4, with the idea of maybe playing c2 and then play this side. But even if he goes a4, bishop c2, this pawn will never move. We're going to leave the pawn in d4. This pawn will never really take it. If it does, the bishop remains locked, and these pawns are not progressing anyway. So that's the thing about this pawn, double pawn in the center is really good. So let's see some ideas. Now, for example, h3 to stop the knight from arriving. Okay, fine. Play c6, and after the bishop move, queen to c7 wins a crucial pawn near the king side. It's impossible to stop this. Like, you might argue, what if the king moves? Or maybe knight moves. Let's make an example. Knight to e2, and now you just play knight h5. And that's it. There's nothing left to do now for our opponent except pushing the pawns in front of his own king. He can't really defend in any possible way. Let's say if... now your idea is to play bishop check. King can't go here to h1 because of rook f2. It's becoming a joke. Completely winning. If king goes to f1, then knight to g3 gives a mate in 9 moves at the very latest for our opponent. Because knight takes, then you're going to take back with the queen. The pawn in f2 is pinned. So it's completely over. So that's the plan you have. And in this position, when we play queen c7, we got double attack on this knight. If the king goes back to h2 to protect the square g3 even more, you've got a sacrifice. Knight to g4 check, and you're going to the square f2, and from there you're completely winning. Beside, the knight in g3 will be hanging. Now you might ask, why can I not take the knight in g4? Okay, but now rook takes in f2, and now the attack on the knight here with the queen and bishop battery is finalized. There is no way to stop it. Position evaluated -4. So let's go back. So here in this position, instead of h3, what about f3? Okay, same thing. You play c6, the bishop has to move. Queen to c7. And now knight to f1 seems to be possible to defend the pawn in h2. Okay, b5, attack the bishop. Only move bishop b3. a5, threatening to trap the bishop. So c3, let's look at this. a4, the bishop goes back. Knight to h5. And white pieces are very misplaced. This bishop, the attacks for bishop, can't move anywhere that makes sense. This bishop can't move at all. The rook isn't threatening to go anywhere. All squares are attacked with the bishop. This knight is confined to a role of defending the pawn in h2. So yeah, in this position, let's see. Queen to e2, developing. This seems to be making perfect sense. Fine. Queen to f7. And after bishop d2, developing move. This is the plan we have. Knight f4. So obviously that knight is a monster. So after take back. The reason why we're winning is one and simple. We're going to play a3. a3 wins the game for black on the spot. The pawn gets taken, but then you take back. You threaten the pawn in c3. Then you're going to pile up the pressure on the square a2. If the pawn doesn't take, you are taken, and then you're going to a2 with the rook no matter what. So let's make an example. The queen tries a swap to calm down the initiative. Fine, take, and now a3. That's it. Nothing else to do. So the most accurate way to continue here is if the pawn, let's say, takes you, first take this knight, and when the knight moves to a3, it defends the pawn in a3 to b1. It defends the pawn in a3, attacks the pawn in c3, but then you play bishop c5 check. King has to move. Bishop d4 defends that pawn, and that's it. There's nothing left to do. White can't move the knight anymore. If he plays a4 to try and move the knight, you play b4. Position has been evaluated completely winning for black for a long time by now. I was just going on with the moves to see how the endgame will look like. So let's go back here. We went through h3, we went through f3. What about here in this position? Queen e2. Without compromising any of the pawn's king side moves. Just queen e2, normal developing move. Fine. c6, once again, bishop back. And now knight g4 is happening. What to do now? If h3 to attack the knight, simply knight f2. That's it, you're completely winning. There's an attack on the knight in g3. And so, yeah. So here, what about f3? Then when you take this one now, in this case, if the king takes, because of the lack of pawns, that allows you to play queen here to h4, and that's game over. No need to continue this. So back in this position, instead of h3 or f3 or queen e2, whatever, let's try this move. Bishop to g5. White says, you know what? This knight here is too much of a problem. I'm going to pin it and take it, so that you no longer have that attack. Okay, fine. c6 once again. Attack the bishop. Bishop a4. And now simply attack the bishop. The bishop can't retreat to h4 because g5 will win a piece. So bishop takes, queen takes, and now got double pressure on the square f2. We're going there, so queen e2 defends it. What to play now? a5. And the idea is to play b5, which wins the white bishop, which traps it. So let's look at this move. a3, with the idea of just going to b3 and then a2, and the bishop is safe. Fine. King to h8, getting out of that diagonal. And now there's no moves. Let's try, for example, rook to c1. There's no other moves that white could have done. Rook to c1, the idea is to play c3, then take this pawn and have a rook more open, which seems to be making sense. But there's no other moves that could be played. So here, bishop to d7 is the move to develop. c3, you take. It's weird because now the rook is open, but now this is an isolated pawn. Black's best move now is queen to d4, attacking the bishop. So when the bishop moves, now you can take the pawn in a3 for free. The rook will not be able, the pawn will not be able to take back, because then you win the rook in c3. So what if, when the bishop was here in a4, what if the bishop actually gone to c2? Best move is rook a to e8. Getting rid of that queen. Position evaluated -5. And all we want to do is just trade so we can finalize the attack on the square f2. So queen moves, take, and now bishop c5 puts 3 attackers on that square f2. So those were insights on what to do. We've seen so much on how to be the Spanish opening. Make sure you watch all the videos so you can master this defense. It's incredible. So f5, let's look at this. We'll make a recap. Knight c3, take. And now instead of knight e4, let's look at this move. Bishop takes knight straight away. We have seen it in the past, but there's a variation we haven't seen. So now we know we have to take with the b pawn, and after the knight takes in e5, we know that the key move now is queen g5, which makes a fork, attacks the knight and the pawn in g2. So in this position, we went through knight g4, and we know we have to play d5. There's double attack on the knight. White plays h3, h5. We have seen it in the past. Make sure you watch the other videos. In this position, though, there's a move we haven't seen, which is white giving up the pawn in g2 for development. So d4 now. The pawn defends the knight. The bishop is releasing an attack on the queen. And now you just take in g2. Okay. So we know how to... obviously, this is so much better for black. Let's look at this move. Queen check. g6 comes now. And after knight to g6, we take the rook. Check. King moves. And now we recapture this knight. And we have to give up our rook. But after this happens, you can play bishop h6 check. The king has to move. Goes to a light square. You play bishop to a6 check. And you can definitely take it from here. Another thing that needs to be seen, and this is now a slightly different topic, is the following. Bishop b5, f5, and now white playing the main move, which is d4. Now, as we know, we have to take the pawn. And after the knight takes, we have this thematic move. We've seen it many times in the previous videos. Take. Pawn takes back, and now c6 wins a pawn for black. So let's see. Now the bishop moves bishop c4, but now you play queen a5 check, and you win the pawn. Knight c3. This is the novelty we need to see. Just a second. Queen e5, castle. As we know, we play d5. It's an amazing center. It's a fantastic position. But now white can choose to ignore the bishop being attacked by the pawn and rather play rook e1. This is obviously one of the best moves, because now you can't take this bishop, since rook takes e4 will pin the queen to the king and we are completely lost. So now you play knight f6, develop. And now obviously this bishop is under pressure because the knight is an extra defender to the square e4. So the move that comes now is f3 to finalize the attack on the square e4. But now it's just too late. Bishop c5 check, king moves, and we castle. And now this bishop is just literally hanging. What to do? Bishop moves, but now you play king h8, and this is a completely winning position for black. The pawn in d5 is no longer pinned. I mean, the most accurate, if pawn does take, you go to g4, position evaluated -8, right? If that gives you an insight on what's really going on. The plan here, if white doesn't move anything and leaves the pawn in f3, then you go for this plan, bishop to d6, putting pressure on h2. Here in this position, when they play f4, always play queen e7, and now the square g5 is compromised and it's yours forever, unless they play h3, but that's really stupid because that allows you to infiltrate anyway. Knight g4 now is just possible. The pawn takes, but then you have a mate. So one last recap. This time we're going to go through d3, so f5, and now d3. Now, as we know, we have to take, and now knight f6, queen to e2 now, straight away. That is the novelty. Okay, so, how to continue? a6, just attack the bishop. So, when the bishop moves, you make a check. Now, two ways to block we're going to look at. Let's see, for instance, bishop blocks, you take. And now, queen takes is not possible, because you can take in e4, and there's no reason to play like that. Knight d2. I mean, you might not take straight away in e4, but that pawn becomes weak. It's going to have to be defended again. Knight takes in e2, develops a piece. Makes sense. d6, castle. Let's look at this idea. We haven't seen something like that at all. b5. The bishop has to move. Knight to a5. We are going to swap with our bishop. What if the bishop refuses and goes to d5? Fine. c6 then. The bishop has to go back. Now that bishop cannot be moved at the moment, so we don't have to take it straight away. Queen to c7. That's the move, and we're just attacking on the queen side. Knight to g5, threatening to go to f7 or maybe e6. Okay, fine. Take this one with check. Knight takes back, and now simply attack this knight. So that move wasn't going anywhere. Remember this pattern. Knight f3, and now the reason why we play c7 is now queen c7 is now clear. We're going to play c5. Let's look at this idea. Knight h4, very annoying move, threatening to go to g6. c4, attack the knight. Knight g6 with an attack on the rook. It doesn't matter. You just take this. They take your rook, but now you take in a2. So that's how it works. So that move, that plan, knight h4 doesn't work. King to d2 to protect the back rank. Fine. Bishop to e6. It looks like the knight can be saved. Knight to g6. We are done in material, but now queen h5 check. c3 to protect, b4. We're going all in. That's how you conduct this attack. Queen to e3. These are all best moves, but it's not gonna help. Take. But now rook to b8, and the game is over. Now, obviously, I don't claim that the game will go exactly like that, but you need to understand the patterns and how to take any type of idea. We've seen hundreds of different ideas on how to win against the Spanish. In the meantime, let's see the last line. After this check, you might argue, what about c3 instead of bishop d2? Okay, bishop to c5, and now at least we have deprived the knight the possibility to go to the ideal c3 square. Okay, bishop e3, what to do now? Take. Looks very solid. What to do? Okay, castle. And after knight d2 developing, d6. This is very solid. Okay, castle long. Let's look at this idea. b5. Bishop moves. King to h8. Let's check. So knight to g5 now with a double attack on the square f7. What to play? You have to play queen e8. Okay, fine. h4 by white. Now you understand why we're looking at the idea of castling long side, because this is the plan. h4. This, you can feel tremendously under pressure here, but don't worry. Play a5. Okay, a3 in order to have a shelter for the bishop. The bishop needs to remain in this diagonal, so a3 is necessary. Otherwise, a4 just does the job. b4. And now if take, you end up with the knight here, completely winning position. The rook is going on the open file. The queen will have access as soon as the knight moves. So obviously white can't take that pawn. What to do now? If white plays, let's say, h5, to then play h6, and it seems to be making sense, you punish it with h6. So the knight will have to move. Knight goes back to f3. a4, attack the bishop. Bishop moves. The bishop will not go to a2, because then you can just take the pawn. Pawn takes back, and now bishop to e6, trading with that bishop, and position evaluated minus 360. This trade cannot be avoided. Let's say, for example, c4. The problem with this move is that it allows you to play knight g4 with an attack on the pawn in f2, and when the queen moves away, you've got knight d4 coming, and you can take it from here. Position evaluated minus 4 for a very simple reason. The knight in g4 cannot be removed. It's going to f2 no matter what. If white declines the swap, you have idea of knight b3, and then after the trade, the rook is attacking the square a3. So in this position, instead of bishop a2, what about bishop c2? That seems to be making more sense. Fine, you take this pawn. Pawn takes back, knight to g4. You recognize the patterns now. Queen moves, and now knight to a5 does the same thing. The knight is going to b3, and from there, it will reach the promised land. So back in this position, we went through the plan of h5, and we know we have to play h6. What if instead white goes on like this? g4, going all in. This is an interesting sacrifice. It's there to open the fight for the rook. Don't worry about it. Bishop takes g4 is the best move. Rook d to g1, attacking the bishop. You can feel very under pressure in this moment, but don't worry. a4. The bishop moves, let's say, to c2, and you do the same thing. Pawn takes in a3. There is nothing going on our king side. If instead the bishop goes to d1 to trade with our bishop, we actually accept the trade. Take, and now take. Now knight to h5 will do the job. We're going to leave the line here. We're going past many moves, so we'll drop it here. This is completely winning position. The plan for the black player here is to play rook to b8, put the rook on an open file, and just reach the second rank. But you also need to play h6. The knight will have to move. Then you can place your knight in f4. You've got nothing to fear except the dark.